The quota reform movement in Bangladesh has rocked and shocked the whole nation due to the massive crackdown on the protesters by law enforcement armed forces and the ruling Awami League student wing, known as the Bangladesh Chhatra League. The quota system and its abolishment in 2018. The immediate cause of the protests was student anger over the reinstatement of a controversial quota system, which reserves a sizable chunk of Bangladesh government service jobs. In the latest repetition of the quotas applied to 56% of Bangladesh government service jobs, most notably, 30% of jobs were reserved for the children and grandchildren of freedom fighters. Other quotas reserve positions for women, 10%, backward districts that are considered marginalized, 10%, minorities such as the indigenous population, 5%, and people with physical disabilities, 1%. As a result, the quota system has been questioned as problematic by students and civil society for a long time. In 2018, a massive protest broke out when students from public universities countrywide demanded reform to the quota system, claiming that the 56% reserved quota does not fairly consider the merits and the vast number of applicants who remain outside the quota criteria. The ruling party, Awami League, which has also been in power for the last 15 years, maintains that they are the true holders of the spirit of the liberation war, and by extension independent Bangladesh. Their politics revolve around the narrative that the opposition parties, such as the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, stand opposed to the spirit of the liberation war due to their relationship with the Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami, a religious-oriented party whose leaders were accused of collaborating with the Pakistani military and committing war crimes and in 1971. Therefore, it was in the interest of the Awami League to sustain and maintain its political position. However, the intensity of the 2018 protests was so high that the government was compelled to abolish the quota system. Then, the protesters left the street. The 2024 protests. On June 5, 2024, the High Court of Bangladesh reinstated the quota system in response to a writ submitted by a freedom fighter dissent. The verdict mentioned that the quota abolishment was unconstitutional, illegal, and ineffective. The quota system was back as if nothing had happened. The students did not take it easily. They have again gone to the streets to protest the return of the quota system, an issue they thought had been resolved. The protests started at the University of Dhaka, arguably the country's best and most historical university. Soon, students at other universities followed suit, and the protests, for the second time within 6 years, turned into a nationwide movement. At first, ruling party politicians and the government were dismissive, saying they had nothing to do with the quota reinstatement, as the order came from the country's highest court. There was also an argument that the protesters should wait until the appeal hearing, which was set for August 7. But the protesters were not ready to listen. They wanted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to reassure them and act. The tension escalated when Hasina made a controversial remark on July 14, while answering a question from a journalist regarding quota reform protesters. She said, "Why do the protesters have so much bother towards the freedom fighters? If the grandchildren of the freedom fighters don't get quota benefits, should the grandchildren of Razakars get the benefit?" Following her remarks, thousands of students from the Dhaka University student dorms came out to the street and started shouting slogan. Hasina should contextualize the students' anger and disappointment before her remarks, Razakar, which is such an insulting label abuse in Bangladesh. It was no wonder that Hasina's remark sparked the students' anger. However, following the students' activities, some of the media chose to deform their anger by the government order. It was a more inflammatory move for the government to misinterpret the students' activities. Meanwhile, the threats only increased the anger of the protesters in all other universities as well. The government still did not choose to sit for a peaceful dialogue with the protesters. Instead, it instituted a mass crackdown on the protesters through law enforcement agencies, such as the Bangladesh Police and Border Guard Bangladesh, and its student wing, the Bangladesh Chhatra League. As a result, it has been reported that 6 protesters died, and hundreds were injured on July 16. The same night, Hasina gave a speech to the nation, claiming she condemned all violence without saying anything that the protesters wanted to hear. The government also shut down all universities, colleges and schools. This did not end the protests. On July 18, the protesters called for a complete shutdown nationwide, except for emergency service vehicles. This time, students from private universities in the capital city joined students from public universities and students from secondary schools and colleges. The government was still not ready to back down. As a result, the crackdown on the protesters became even more aggressive. There were various reports of death tolls. With the situation worsening, the law minister came in front of the media. The government was ready to sit down with the protesters. However, the attack continued on students. With a massive backlash from netizens seeing horrific images and videos of injured and dead students, the protesters declared that they were not going to talk with the government over the dead bodies of their comrades. Immediately, Bangladesh government shut down the internet and the mobile network countrywide, making it impossible to know what was happening. Nevertheless, it has been reported that more than 500 or more protesters were killed over the 2 days, and thousands were injured. It's no longer about quota reform now. The current government and its supporters keep saying that the quota reform movement has been hijacked from the general students by the BNP and Jamaat-e-Islami cadres, who are allegedly trying to create chaos. However, the basis of such claims is totally a lie to the nation. In a word, the government says that the current protest the existence of the current regime. This is because the since 2009. The nature of elections 2019 and 2024 shows that over the past year, the government have retained their power without any participation of the people and through forced vote stealing and robbery. There are also wide concerns about corruption in the government sector and private sectors. Recently, news broke out that even the civil service job questions were being leaked by the Public Service Commission, PSC, officials for the last 12 years. Finally, for a long time, the ruling party's student wing, Chhatra League, has been accused of torturing not only the opposition party's student wing, but also the general student population, including in the current protests. The accumulation of all these and many more factors created mass anger among the youth and the nation's general population. So, the protest movement didn't remain the same as when it started, and it became the movement of the nation's general population of the country. The ruling Awami League sees the protests as an existential threat. If so, the government can only blame itself and its no-compromise approach for that development. Their failure to stop recklessness, corruption, use of students against students, excessive force, and depriving the voting rights of the general people, despite presenting themselves as a democratic government to the whole world. In reality, a massive public backlash had erupted in Bangladesh through long-standing dictatorship, and finally Hasina was forced to step down as Prime Minister on the 5th of August 2024. In 2024, Bangladesh has become a role model for what could be the consequences of arbitrarily accusing and killing protesting students and people against their logical demands. Source: thediplomat.com